The cold in Siberia was not something you simply felt. It was something alive. It crept into your bones, whispered through the cracks of wooden walls, and reminded you that nature was always stronger than man. That winter, the temperature had fallen to 71 degrees, colder than anyone in the small village of Oymyakon could remember. Elena Petrovna had lived alone on the edge of the forest for nearly 20 years. Her small wooden cabin stood surrounded by endless white, with only the dark silhouettes of pine trees watching silently. At 72 years old, she had grown used to the loneliness. Her husband had died long ago, and her son had moved to the city, promising to return one day. He never did. Each morning, Elena lit her stove, wrapped herself in layers of wool, and stepped outside to gather firewood. The snow crunched loudly beneath her boots, breaking the silence of the frozen land. She spoke to herself sometimes just to hear a voice, but one evening something unusual happened. She had just finished her dinner of soup and black bread when she heard a faint sound outside her door. "Scratch! Scratch!" Elena froze. The sound came again, weak and desperate. Her heart pounded. Wolves often wandered near the cabins during harsh winters, driven by hunger. Slowly, with trembling hands, she picked up her lantern and moved toward the door. "Who's there?" she whispered, though she knew no human would be outside in such deadly cold. The scratching grew weaker. Elena hesitated only a moment before opening the door. A gust of icy wind rushed inside, nearly blowing out her lantern. She held it higher and looked down. There, curled against her doorstep, was a tiny bear cub. Its fur was covered in frost, its small body shaking uncontrollably. Its eyes, half closed with exhaustion, looked up at her, not with aggression, but with fear. Elena gasped.
"Oh, you poor thing."
The cub was no bigger than a large dog. It was alone. That meant only one thing. Its mother was gone. In Siberia, a cub without its mother rarely survived more than a few days. Elena knew the danger. Bears were wild animals. Even cubs could grow into creatures capable of killing with a single strike. Every sensible thought told her to close the door. But when the cub let out a weak cry, something deep inside her broke. It sounded like a child crying. Without thinking further, she set the lantern down and carefully lifted the cub. It was lighter than she expected, its body thin from hunger. "There now," she whispered softly. "You're safe." She brought it inside and closed the door against the merciless cold. The cub lay quietly beside the stove, too weak to move. Elena poured some warm goat milk into a bowl and gently pushed it toward the animal. At first it didn't react. Then slowly the cub lifted its head. It sniffed the milk and began to drink. Elena watched in silence, her heart filled with something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. The cub grew stronger with each passing day. At first, Elena fed her warm milk and small pieces of fish. The tiny creature followed her everywhere, its small paws slipping on the wooden floor as it tried to keep up. Elena had never cared for a wild animal before, but instinct guided her. She spoke to the cub constantly, her soft voice filling the cabin. "I will call you Misha," she said one morning, smiling as the cub tilted its head. Misha quickly became more than just an animal. She became family. As weeks passed, Misha's strength returned. Her fur grew thick and healthy, and her playful energy filled the once silent cabin. She would chase Elena's broom as she cleaned, tumble across the floor, and curl beside her at night near the warm stove. For the first time in many years, Elena was no longer alone. But Elena knew this moment could not last forever. Bears belonged to the wild. Months turned into a year. Misha was no longer a helpless cub. She had grown large and powerful, her paws heavy, her body strong. Yet she remained gentle with Elena, always careful, always calm. Sometimes Misha would stand by the door, staring outside at the endless forest. Her true home. Elena understood what it meant. One spring morning, when the snow began to melt and the air softened, Elena made the hardest decision of her life. She opened the door. Misha stood beside her, sensing something different. "It's time," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "You belong out there." Misha looked at her, her dark eyes full of trust. For a moment, neither moved. Then slowly, Misha stepped outside. She turned back once, as if unsure. Elena forced a smile through her tears. "Go, my girl." Misha walked into the forest, her large body moving between the trees until she disappeared completely. The silence returned. The cabin felt empty again. Days passed. Then weeks. Misha did not return. Elena missed her deeply, but she never regretted her decision. She knew she had given Misha what she needed most, freedom. Years went by. Elena grew older. Her hair turned completely white, and her steps became slower. Life returned to its quiet routine. Sometimes, she thought she saw a large shape between the trees watching her cabin, but when she looked carefully, there was nothing there. She wondered if Misha still lived. She hoped she did. One winter evening, nearly 4 years later, the cold returned stronger than ever. The temperature dropped again to deadly levels. Elena sat beside her stove, listening to the wind. Then suddenly, "Scratch! Scratch!" Her heart stopped. The sound was familiar. Slowly, she stood, her hands trembling, and walked toward the door. She opened it. At first, she saw only darkness and snow. Then, from the shadows, a massive bear stepped forward. Elena gasped. The bear was enormous, its fur thick, its body powerful. But its eyes, she knew those eyes. "Misha," she whispered. The wind roared across the Siberian plains, carrying ice and snow like knives through the darkness. Elena stood frozen in the doorway of her small cabin, staring at the enormous bear before her. "Misha," she whispered again, barely believing her eyes. 4 years had passed since she had watched the young bear disappear into the forest. Now Misha stood taller, stronger, and heavier than Elena could have imagined. Her thick brown fur was dusted with frost, and her breath formed heavy clouds in the frozen air. But it was her eyes that told the true story. They were the same gentle, knowing eyes of the cub Elena had once carried inside. Misha took one slow step forward. Elena did not move. She felt no fear, only emotion. The bear lowered her massive head slightly, almost like a greeting. And then Elena noticed how carefully Misha was standing. Her body shifted awkwardly, protective. That was when Elena understood. Misha wasn't just visiting. She was searching for shelter. The temperature had dropped again to 71 aga, the kind of cold that kills even the strongest animals. And Misha, heavy with unborn cubs, needed a safe place. She remembers, Elena whispered to herself. Through all the seasons, through years in the wild, Misha had remembered the warm cabin, the stove, the woman who had once saved her life. Elena stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come," she said softly. "You are always welcome here." Misha hesitated only a second before slowly stepping inside. The wooden floor creaked under her massive weight. The cabin suddenly felt very small. Elena quickly shut the door against the wind. Misha moved toward the stove and lay down carefully, breathing heavily. Her sides rose and fell in slow rhythm. She was exhausted. Elena's old heart ached with love and worry. "You traveled far, didn't you?" she murmured, bringing water and pieces of frozen fish she had stored. Misha accepted the food calmly. She did not act wild or aggressive. It was as if she understood she was home. That night, Elena did not sleep. She sat beside Misha, adding wood to the fire, whispering soft words the way she had years ago. Outside, the storm grew worse. Inside, something extraordinary was about to happen. Near dawn, Misha began to shift and groan softly. Elena immediately understood. "It's time," she breathed. Hours passed slowly. Elena stayed near but gave space, speaking gently to calm the great animal. By midday, the first tiny cry filled the cabin. Then another, and another. 3 small cubs, blind, fragile, new to the brutal world. Elena's eyes filled with tears as she watched Misha carefully lick and warm her newborns. Life. In the deadliest cold on earth, life had returned to her cabin. Misha looked at Elena once more, long and steady. There was something in that look that needed no words. Gratitude, trust, love. For several weeks, Misha stayed. The cubs grew stronger beside the warm stove, just as their mother once had. Elena moved slowly. The end